Part 64. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 631. At the beginning of the lanterns, the main hall of the palace was brightly lit. Su Wangsuyu sat behind the planning table and looked at the imperial edict that had just been sent. The staff and generals of the Ziliang army gathered together to discuss and analyze the imperial court's intentions, while the four generals rushed to fight and lead their troops to follow the prince into the pass. The Ziliang army, like the Guangzhou army, is a professional soldier. They don't have to farm. They are trained to kill enemies full-time. They implement a military merit system. If they don't fight, their titles will be reduced and there will be no rewards. It's equivalent to eating the Northwest if they don't fight. Feng, even the soldiers will be dissatisfied if there is no fighting for too long. If there is a battle to be fought, they will rush to it. Xiao Qi and Su Buling sat together and listened to the words of many staff and military advisors without interrupting. After discussing for a while, Su Wangsuyu put down the imperial edict and said, "The imperial court only transferred 50,000 people to enter the pass. It wanted the Ziliang army to only defend but not attack, and stand in a stalemate with the three kings in the east, so as to create a gap and quell the war in the north. The main force encountering the rebellion afterwards was still the Guangzhou army and the Liaxi protectorate. The Ziliang army cannot win the majority of the troops. How should we fight this battle?" Xiao Qi had already considered the current situation, and now she said, "As soon as the Ziliang army moves, the king of Chu will definitely turn to the king of Wu. The front lines between the two sides are estimated to be in Jingzhou and Xiangyang. If you want to profit from this counterinsurgency, at least before the northern Qi retreats, the Ziliang army must destroy the king of Chu and collect the remaining troops, approaching the territory of the king of Wei. It would be best if the four eastern kings can be quelled in one fell swoop. When the time comes, Su Buling will return to Chang'an with the quelled rebels, and Chang'an will issue an edict from King Qin. The two kings of Shu and Yu have no soldiers, and the only ones who can rush to rescue them are Ziliang's 150,000 soldiers and horses." The fourth generals were stunned when they heard this. General Yang Zunyi spread his hands and said, "If it goes so well, why not issue the Qin Wang order and just welcome the prince to Chang'an and ascend the throne?" In the main hall of the palace, no one dared to laugh. King Su raised his hand to stop Xiao Qi's words. "These are too far-fetched. As you ministers and dead you ghosts, my Su family has no reason to start planning for Chang'an before sending troops." Xiao Qi pursed her lips and said no more. Su Buling thought for a moment. The three kings in the east are all miscellaneous soldiers and refugees, but there are also 700,000 people. If the king of Chu defects, it will be millions. In addition, Wu and Chu have the world's richest granaries. It's really difficult to defeat 50,000 people. General Tu Qianchu waved his hand when he heard this. If one soldier is defeated, there will be a whole bunch of soldiers. It is true that the Chu people were warlike, but those who were warlike back then were all killed. Now all those left behind are hereditary military households. Jiangnan is not dare to say, the prince's 50,000 troops are enough to destroy the 300,000 soldiers and horses under the command of the king of Chu. Tu Qianchu's father was the most powerful general under King Su Lai of Su. He once led his troops to destroy the main army of Daqi stationed in Chu. The name Tu Qianchu also came from this. He really didn't care about the soldiers and horses of Chu. In eyes. However, most of Tu Qianchu's troops were cavalry and 20,000 armored cavalry were among them. If they were all pulled out, they would not be able to defend against Prince Zhou's Iron Sha of the northern Qi dynasty. They certainly couldn't get rid of them all. Su Wangsuyu thought for a moment and raised his hand and said, "Your Majesty will take command. Tu Qianchu and Yang Zunyi will serve as deputy commanders. Yu Zhulu will serve as military advisor. Tu Qianchu, you draw 10,000 light cavalry and 5,000 heavy cavalry from under your hands. The remaining three groups each draw spearmen, We must gather 50,000 crossbowmen to enter the pass and put down the rebellion. Promise. There was a solemn silence in the main hall, and he immediately stood up to take orders. Xiao Qi heard that 2 of the 4 generals were sent out, and after thinking about it for a moment, she understood the meaning. The 4 generals of the Ziliang army, who had followed Su Lai in the northern and southern campaigns, were all handsome men who had led hundreds of thousands of troops. The son may not necessarily be better than his father, but he must be not far behind after being trained since he was young. Letting 2 generals lead 50,000 small soldiers is obviously overqualified and underutilized. The purpose must be to avoid gathering the remaining soldiers and surrendering on the road to countering the rebellion. The snowball is getting bigger and bigger. Will be available. Su Yu thought for a moment, looked at many of his subordinates and warned him again, on the battlefield, the situation is ever-changing, and it is difficult to predict the outcome beforehand. The bottom line for this counterinsurgency is to defend the Guanzhong road. How to advance the rest of the army, follow the trend, there is no way to counterattack. There is no need to use force to push back. Promise. Everyone bowed and accepted the order. After ordering the generals, Su Wang Suyu left the hall, followed by Su Buling and Xiao Qi. Suyu walked with his hands behind his back, thought for a while, and then said, "When marching and fighting, the most difficult thing is to attack the city. If the Ziliang army can break the city, no one can stop it, but the city wall and pass are there, and the siege losses will be heavy. If 50,000 people attack the city, 5,000 people can defend it until they run out of ammunition and food. I've seen the artillery you built several times, and it's miraculous in attacking and defending cities, but it takes time to build and transport it. Don't kill all 50,000 people in the past few months." Su Buling nodded. "Father, don't worry, without artillery, I can open the city gate alone." Xiao Qi frowned slightly when she heard this. A round of crossbow formation volley, no matter how good your martial arts skills are, you will become a sieve. It's so easy to attack the city, why build the city wall? Su Buling said with a smile, "I do this when I have no choice but to fight like this." Su Wang Suyu raised his hand. "Okay, go down and prepare. Don't take Chang'an directly with your troops. It's useless to defeat him now." Su Buling nodded seriously, raised his hand and saluted, and then followed Xiao Qi back to the back house. The transfer order from Chang'an City came, and the news was quickly learned in the back house, and many girls suddenly panicked. Lu Hongluan and Song Yufu had just gotten married, and they couldn't bear to let their husbands go off to fight. When they were in Chang'an City, they had seen all the women who had waited for their husbands to come back when they were young, and waited until they were old and middle-aged. Naturally, they were worried that Su Buling would go out. Just fight for several years. After Su Buling returned to the back house, a group of girls immediately surrounded him before he changed out of his prince's robe. Lu Hongluan knew the seriousness of the matter and did not dare to stop him. She just stood by, her eyes red, and whispered, "Ling how long will you be out?" Xiao Xiang'er held Xiao Qi's hand and pleaded pitifully, "Sister, Su Buling is going to the war, you must follow him to give advice. We look the same, so it's okay for me to follow him, right?" Xiao Qi naturally wanted to follow him. She wanted to leave Xiang'er in Ziliang, but she knew that her sister was addicted. She couldn't even sleep without Su Buling. The war would last at least 1 or 2 years. How could she bear to let her sister stay alone in the empty room? She just said, "Xiang'er has a deep knowledge of strange and erotic skills, and her knowledge far exceeds that of the military craftsman. It's not useless to take her with you." When Xiao Qi opened her mouth, the other girls naturally couldn't sit still. Ning Yu held up a long sword and said softly, "I am very good at martial arts. The crown princess and Xiang'er always need a guard when they go out. I will follow them." Zhongli Jiju said seriously, "My medical skills have been seen by all the sisters. If I don't bring me with you, you may not feel at ease. Song Yufu pursed her lips and said a little unconfidently, I can write memorials and draft documents, which should be of some use. From the looks of it, she wants to follow them. Compared with the 6 wives, the 3 girls are obviously much more relaxed. They didn't marry into the Su family and are still free people. They can follow them even if they can't bring them with them. They are standing behind and watching. Su Buling cares most about these girls around him. He doesn't want them to run away and become monks for a few years just to fight. He waved his hand. I am the prince of a vassal state. It is okay for me to lead a few families with me. However, the situation of a large army march is unpredictable, and it is easy to go wrong if we bring too many people. Jeju and Master King Yi Chu know martial arts, so they can protect themselves in the chaos. Come with me. Kikai, you should take the boat and follow the others behind the army. The girls were pleasantly surprised and nodded quickly. Zhu Manzi crossed his arms and was a little unhappy at this time. Mr. Su, I also know martial arts. I used to be a wolf guard. Su Buling raised his hand and flicked Manzi's head. So you stay to protect Yufu and the sisters, okay. Zhu Manzi frowned and glanced at Ning Qingyi, who had a strange expression next to him. Like Zhongli Chuchu, she felt very sour, but she didn't dare to cause trouble when she went out to fight, so she could only hum reluctantly. When Lu Hongluan heard that she could follow behind, her face was full of joy, and she turned around and said, I'll go pack my things. Su Buling was a little amused, raised his hand and said, it will take several days to transfer 50,000 troops, and at least a month to reach Chang'an. There is a long time, so don't be so anxious. We have to pack anyway. Yufu, let's go. Oh. Song Yufu hurriedly followed. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 632. It was already dark, and the back house of the palace was quiet. In Zhongli Jeju's courtyard, the little sparrow squatted pitifully on the wall, with a handful of pine nuts under its feet. From time to time, it lowered its head to pick up one and stuffed it into its beak, watching the surroundings in boredom. Zhongli Jeju was born in Jianghu and did not like to use maids. There was no one else in the courtyard. The lights in the concubine's bedroom have been extinguished. Inside the large room, the curtains have hung down. White skirts, blue skirts, leg rings, and other items are scattered on the ground. A few gasps and conversations are faintly visible. Damn bitch, why did you arrest me? MS sir, she scolded me again. Jur is good. The messy sounds lasted for a long time before they calmed down. Between the curtains, Su Buling lay down on the spring quilt and let out a long sigh of relief. Zhongli Jeju turned over and lay on the inside, her cheeks were a little moist, her eyes were squinting and her breathing was slightly up and down. She didn't want to move, and she didn't even have the strength to speak. Ning Yu left the game early and had already recovered. He was lying on the outside with a slightly red face. He moved Su Buling's arm over and put it under his cheek as a pillow. He glanced at the opposite side with a slight dissatisfaction. You are the loudest in the house and can be heard through the courtyard wall. Aren't you afraid of the maid making fun of you? Zhongli Jeju squinted his eyes and pursed his lips. Perhaps he was too dizzy and had no strength to respond. Su Buling hugged Jeju with his right hand and let her rest on his arm. He tilted his head and smiled and said, Master, Jeju is so dizzy that she may not even remember her last name. Where did she pay attention to this? Zhongli Jeju was not dizzy. Hearing these words, he became slightly dissatisfied and raised his hand to lightly beat Su Buling's chest. Ning Yu taunted his rival, but when he saw that the other party didn't respond, he lost interest. She came over just now because she was about to go on an expedition and wanted to ask Kui Zioan what to do. She didn't expect to come over and bumped into Su Buling preparing to marry his concubine. She had already come and couldn't run away. She was half pushed and half pushed in. After working hard for most of the night, Ningyu finally had some free time. He raised his eyes and asked, "Your Majesty, we are all gone, what will happen to Queen Kui?" Su Buling was also worried about this. He had nothing to do with Kui Zioan. If he really wanted to settle it, he would call her aunt. He couldn't treat her like his wife. He thought for a moment. Kui Zioan is a bit autistic and likes to be alone. Living in the Sea of Flowers should be no problem. Besides, we are going out to fight, so we can't force her out. If the Emperor sees her when passing through Guangzhou, we might have to change the route to attack Chang'an City. Ningyu naturally understood the consequences of Kui Zioan being discovered by the Emperor. Not to mention Kui Zioan, even she, a new queen, was found sleeping in Su Buling's house, which would be a big deal. But Kui Zioan was kind to her after all. She hesitated and sighed quietly. A war is not something that lasts only 2 or 3 days. I don't think it's good to leave a girl alone in Suzhou. I don't feel good about it either, but you can't just take her to fight on your own. I'll take some time to go over and talk to her. Ningyu nodded. Empress Kui has been very kind to me. Logically speaking, I should stay with her, but Empress Kui's temperament is indeed different. It feels strange when I chat with her. She seems innocent, but I feel like I can't hide anything from her. Su Buling felt the same way. Yes, he looks a bit naive. Noob. Ningyu's face turned red when he heard the inappropriate words. He moved his legs away from Su Buling's waist and turned around slightly. Your Majesty, why are you talking so freely? You can just call me Dabai in private. I am your woman after all. Queen Kui is an innocent daughter. Can you say such nonsense? Su Buling was a little innocent. The Xiaobai I'm talking about is not what master thinks. Zhongli Jiju lay down for a while and recovered a little. At this time, he opened his eyes and raised his hand to touch Ningyu's flying phoenix. That Empress Kui is just as bad as he. Ningyu was excited, raised her hand and pinched Zhongli Jiju's wrist. Damn bitch, do you believe I will shave you off right now? Ah, it hurts. Zhongli Jiju frowned. His martial arts skills were not as high as those of Ningyu. He was caught off guard and his arm was caught, and he let out a soft cry. Su Buling was not willing to let his master beat his wife, so he quickly grabbed Ningyu and separated his hands. While the three of them were having a fight, 2 birds chirping suddenly came from outside the window. Then the footsteps came from far to near, heading towards the courtyard, and they could be heard clearly in the night. Su Bulenling paused and listened, slightly confused. It's not a baby, it seems to be Choo Choo. Zhongli Jiju also heard the footsteps, her face turned red, and she quickly pushed Su Buling. You two, hurry up, don't let Choo Choo see it. Su Buling slept at his own home, with his legitimate wife, so there was no need to hide away. He thought for a while and said, everyone in the house knows I'm here tonight, and I didn't hide it from Choo Choo. She probably came to see me. Ningyu was a little embarrassed. She came here secretly and it was not easy for anyone to catch her. But it was a bit troublesome to get up and put on the skirt now. Choo Choo knew that Su Buling was here and probably wouldn't come in. She thought about it, then held her breath and lay quietly without making any sound. The silver moon hung in the sky, and the yellow sand and streets and buildings all turned gray-white under the moonlight. In the corridor of the back house, Zhongli Choo Choo, wearing a red gauze skirt, walked slowly towards the master's yard. Her green eyes were shining in the night. She didn't look scary against her beautiful face, but rather had a different charm. In the afternoon, the transfer order came, and Su Buling was ready to load all the girls on the boat and go out together as before. The girls in the back house were naturally very happy. Even Ning Qingyi packed up quickly and mocked Xiao Manzi for not being able to follow her closely because of her poor martial arts. Needless to say, Song Yufa was just married, so she was reluctant to be separated from her husband. She even regretted not practicing martial arts in her childhood, otherwise she could have been with Su Buling. Zhongli Chuchu didn't say anything, but her mind was obviously entangled. She was not Su Buling's woman, but just the apprentice of Su Buling's woman. She had no relationship with Su Buling at all. How could he arrange for her to follow? It felt like tacitly acknowledging that she was Su Buling's woman. If she doesn't follow, she can't stay in Suzhou alone. What Ningyu he said last time makes sense. She can't just say goodbye to Su Buling and Master because of the current situation. She has to stay together if she can. But if she follows, she feels too attached. They are not related to each other yet. Even if she wants to follow, she should at least talk to her and say something like ask her for help or worry about your safety. This attitude of directly acquiescing that she will follow is really a bit unhappy. Zhongli Chuchu couldn't sleep at night and tossed and turned. She felt that she had to come here to be arrogant and pretend not to follow, so as not to make Su Buling too self-righteous. However, Zhongli Chuchu is smarter than before. She chose to come here now because Master is here and will definitely not let her go. If she talked to Su Buling alone, she would be dumbfounded if Su Buling told her to go cleanly as before. She walked slowly to Master's yard. The little sparrow chirped on the wall, obviously reminding the people inside. Zhongli Chuchu's eyes darkened, and he made a gesture of wiping his neck. The little sparrow quickly closed its beak, turned its head on the courtyard wall, and stretched out its little claws to push a few pine nuts forward. Zhongli Chuchu was satisfied, and walked slowly into the quiet courtyard, saying, "Master, are you asleep?" In the room, Zhongli Chuchu's response soon came. "Chuchu, why are you here?" The master has already gone to bed." Zhongli Chuchu did not stop, and walked directly to the door. "It's okay as long as you are not asleep." "Hey!" Zhongli Chuchu exclaimed softly, and said anxiously, "Don't come in, husband, Su Buling is here. I am a concubine, today it's my turn to do that." Zhongli Chuchu came to find Su Buling, so she naturally knew that Su Buling was inside, and she did not stop, just said, "It's good that he is here, there are some things to tell him." While speaking, she pushed open the door, and Zhongli Chuchu looked over, the curtain swayed, and a hand retracted, which should be picking up something on the ground, and it was obvious that she had not picked up everything, and the leg ring and other things were still on the ground. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 633. Zhongli and Chuchu had caught a cheater at the inn last time. At this time, she was not shy at all, but she just snorted secretly in her heart. If Zhongli and Chuchu weren't embarrassed, then the other party would certainly be. Between the curtains, Su Buling's face froze slightly, and he comforted Juju and Yuhi with his hands, telling them not to panic, and said, "Chuchu, why did you come in?" It's a little inconvenient." Zhongli Chuchu didn't look at the curtain. After closing the door, she walked into the room, bent down and picked up the leg rings and blue skirt on the ground. "My master's yard, we have lived together since childhood, why can't we come in?" "Well." Su Buletinling was speechless for a moment, it was hard to say anything. Zhongli Chuchu put the leg ring on the table, unfolded the skirt, and folded it carefully. Zhongli Juju had been listening to the noise, and when she noticed Chuchu's actions, her eyes could not hide her embarrassment. She felt as if she had been stripped naked and thrown on the street for public display, so she quickly said, "Chuchu, I can just clean up later." Zhongli Chuchu just wanted to torment his disrespectful biological master, so naturally he would not stop. He folded his clothes in a very obedient and sensible manner and said calmly, "You are about to go out to fight. I don't know how long it will take before you leave. I came here to say goodbye to you in advance." Hearing this, the three people in the quilt were stunned. Zhonglijiju's eyes were anxious, and he couldn't care less about the embarrassment, and stood up slightly. "Chu-Chu, what do you mean by this? Didn't we agree to leave together?" Zhongli Chu-Chu shook his head. "When did I say that I would follow? The war has nothing to do with me. You are already married. From now on, our master and disciple will be two families. What should I do with you if I have nothing to do?" Zhongli Jiju's expression froze, his eyes a little aggrieved, but he didn't know how to answer. Su Buling thought for a while. "Chu-Chu, we are all leaving. It is meaningless for you to stay alone in Suzhou." "Who said I want to stay in Suzhou?" Zhongli Chu-Chu put the folded dress on the table, and picked up a golden quail egg from the table. She didn't know what it was, so she held it in her hand and played with it casually. "I'll follow you into the customs, but I'm just going back to South Vietnam. The war with Udayu is not peaceful. I'll go back to the village to rest for a few years and practice some martial arts. When I have time, I can just visit you. There's no such thing as a banquet in the world." "Well." Ning Yuhi's eyes were slightly suspicious, but she didn't dare to move and could only bump Su Buling lightly with her elbow. When Zhongli Jiju heard this, she was naturally anxious and said in a soft voice, "Chu-Chu, don't be stubborn. This place is more than 5,000 miles away from the village. How can you go back alone? Besides, what's good about the village? If you don't have good medical skills, you can't make a living. You can't just pick tea and farm." Zhongli Chu-Chu was slightly dissatisfied. "The village has beautiful mountains and rivers. What's wrong with singing folk songs and picking tea? Maybe we can meet a mighty man in another village. The men over there are very strong, and a woman who is the master of the house is much better than the stubborn scholar with a bad temper like Mr. Zhong Yuan." Zhongli Jiju was in embarrassment and couldn't speak to his apprentice, so he could only push and refuse. Su Buling couldn't figure out what Chu-Chu meant, but he definitely didn't want Chu-Chu to run into the ravines of Nanyu Mountains. He could only say with a smile, "Chu-Chu, South Vietnam is too far away, and it's too inconvenient to go back and forth. How about you keep it for now, and when the war is over, we can go back with you to take a look." Zhongli Chu-Chu snorted lightly. "You and I have nothing to do with each other. I have no official position and no status. I am following you and just being a maid behind the saddle." When Su Buling heard this, he finally understood the meaning. Chu-Chu felt embarrassed because he had no identity. He smiled and said, "There were too many things during the day, and I forgot to arrange these. Well, you and King Yi are both good at martial arts, and know a lot about hidden weapons, so they can definitely help. Of course, I won't let you because of Juju's identity. It's nothing to help me. I'll settle the score with my master and apprentice. How about I hire you as a staff member?" Zhongli Chu-Chu came here for this reason. Now that he has a reasonable identity, he no longer shirks it and reluctantly nods. "For the sake of being a friend, since you have spoken, I can't refuse. But I have agreed in advance that I am just helping you, and I will do the work for you. There is no other relationship." Su Buling nodded. "That's natural." Seeing Chu-Chu relent, Zhongli Jiju breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe he felt that Chu-Chu was too alienated from her now, and felt a little uncomfortable, so he said, "Chu-Chu, I didn't think so much, but, I am your master after all. You follow me and I protect you, which is what you should do. You don't have to do anything for him." Ning Yuhi was speechless when he heard this. He finally persuaded Chu-Chu, saying that he felt uncomfortable. She quickly raised her hand and pinched Zhongli, signaling her to stop talking. "I couldn't tell what was where in the quilt, and the pinch was quite heavy. Zhongli Jiju, who was speaking, trembled suddenly, screamed ah dash and took a breath. Zhongli Chuchu originally wanted to say something to the master, but when she heard the sound, she could clearly tell that it was coming from pain. She thought that the master would not let her do things for Su Buling, so Su Buling hit the master, and she suddenly felt angry. Raised his hand and opened the curtain. Su Buletin Ling, you bastard, how dare you hit me, oh my god. Between the curtains, Ning Yuhi's face turned red as he pulled up the quilt and covered his face, but it was too late. Zhongli Jiju covered her mouth, her eyes full of panic and embarrassment. Su Buletin Ling's eyes looked slightly embarrassed. After thinking for a while, he put on a stern look and pulled up the quilt. Then what? Pooh. Zhongli's green eyes were filled with unspeakable astonishment. After glancing back and forth twice, goosebumps arose. I wanted to turn around and run away, but I felt something was wrong, so I frowned and said, Taoist Master Ning, are you and my master at odds with each other? Why? Ning Yuhi covered his face and was so angry that he dug a hole in the ground to bury himself. When he heard Chu Chu's question, his voice was like a mosquito. Well, I can't help it. You still don't know what your master's temperament is. In order to tease me, she dragged me here. I don't know how she came up with such an immoral thing. I don't know if she will agree to it or not neither. Bah! Zhongli Jiju's beautiful fox-like eyes were stunned for a moment, and there was a bit of anger in them. Is she immoral? When had she not been forcibly held down by Ning Yuhi? The back is gone. Also, if Su Buling doesn't agree, can she still force the two of them to mess around? Absurd. Shameless. However, Ning Yuhi persuaded Chu Chu, and Zhongli Jiju did not dare to ruin Ning Yuhi's character as Bing Jiu. Seeing that Chu Chu was a little suspicious, she quickly swallowed her anger and said, Chu Chu, I'm sorry, I just wanted to tease Ning Yuhi, but I didn't expect you to bump into me. Zhongli Chu Shuten's mouth opened slightly. After holding it in for a long time, he turned his eyes to his master and said angrily, Why are you so disrespectful? Is it interesting? Zhongli Jiju felt aggrieved and almost cried, but she didn't have the nerve to explain these words to Chu Chu, so she could only lower her head in shame. Ning Yuhi hid under the quilt and sighed softly, Forget it, I don't blame her, Chu Chu, you go back first, otherwise I won't get well. Zhongli Chuchu's eyes were complicated, and he felt that his worldview had collapsed. He couldn't stand it anymore, so he raised his hand to throw down the curtain, turned around and walked out. Su Bulingwai was embarrassed and opened his mouth, but it was hard to say anything. After Chu Chu's footsteps disappeared in the courtyard, Zhongli Jiju suddenly became angry, stood up, and kicked Ning Yuhi. You stinky Taoist nun, why don't you leave? Why are you still staying in my room? Ning Yuhi faced Zhongli Jiju, but he never let go. He held her down with his backhand and said coldly, Damn mother-in-law, aren't I thinking about your disciple? I'm heartless, Ling-er, why are you pulling me? Master, be good, let Jiju calm down. Yes, sir, take care of her, I'll go find Sister Bao Bao and ask for her tail. Call the baby over by the way. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 634. The bed collapsed. In the middle of the night, Su Buling squatted in the boudoir with two wooden boards, quietly repairing the silly wife's embroidery bed. Ning Yuhi was worried about being discovered, so he returned to his yard early. On the carved soft couch in the boudoir, Xiao Xiang and Zhongliju were wrapped in spring quilts, lying together like caterpillars. Xiao Xiang only showed her charming face, her almond-shaped eyes were a little disappointed, and now she was still complaining, what a ruined palace, it collapsed under the weight of 4 people. I have never seen such bad furniture since I was a child. It's really funny, my horizons are widened. Zhongli Jiju's eyes were embarrassed, and she carefully looked outside. Please keep your voice down, if people find out, sister, I will be embarrassed to live. Su Buletinling looked a little embarrassed. He couldn't talk back after being scolded by his wife. He repaired the bed honestly, hugged the two of them and put them back together. He wanted to continue, but was kicked out by the frightened Juju. Su Buling knew that he had treated his wife badly, so he lay down on the sofa angrily, hugging the quilt, and closed his eyes for a while, and the sky became dim. He didn't sleep well last night, and Su Buling didn't have the nerve to wake up the two people who had just fallen asleep. He got up and put on his robes lightly. After washing and eating, he went to the council hall and met with the palace think tank who had gotten up early. Get down to business. 50,000 troops is not a large number, but it is definitely a lot. Behind them are engineers, civilians, pack horses, etc. The heavy cavalry also has 2 servants per ride. The actual number is definitely more than 50,000. Just the logistics of food and grass and the scheduling of the march are very demanding. After several days of preparation, there can be no mistakes. After discussing the matter, it was already noon. Su Buling took some free time and rode his horse to the Sea of Flowers outside Suzhou City. In mid-February, soothed by the spring breeze, the Sea of Flowers beside Yuanyang Lake changes almost every day. At this time, thousands of flowers are in bloom, and the fragrance of the flowers can be smelled half a mile away. Arriving in the Sea of Flowers, Su Buring had not yet reached the wooden house. On the terrace of the wooden house in the distance, Kui Zioan, wearing a warm yellow skirt, held a small wooden stick in her hand and hurriedly taught. Don't bite it, why are you so cruel? At the edge of the terrace, the little black dog and the big yellow dog were hiding in the corner and shivering with fear in their eyes. They had already stood up with their backs against the corner, tilting their heads and waving their paws, wailing. The big white goose, which had recovered from a long run, waved its big wings, biting one of Wang's hind legs fiercely and dragging it out. It looked like a rich man who raped a peasant girl. The scene was terrible to watch. Kui Zioan was not very courageous, and she didn't dare to hit her with a small wooden stick. She hid behind the recliner, her eyes a little angry, but she had no choice but to wave the small wooden stick helplessly. If you bite again, I'll stew you later, I'm serious. Seeing this scene, Su Buring couldn't laugh or cry. He quickly jumped onto the terrace and lifted up the wanton prince by. The little black dog and Ah Huang were granted amnesty and jumped into the newly built kennel next to the wooden house, not even forgetting to close the fence door. When Kui Zioan saw Su Buling coming, the annoyance on her face subsided and she said crisply. Hey, where did you find the goose? It's not obedient at all. It started chasing the dog and biting it when it was delivered yesterday afternoon. I was afraid that it would kill the dog and I didn't dare to sleep. Su Buling threw the big white goose into the Sea of Flowers and said with a smile, it can't bite Ah Huang to death, it's just a joke. A weak girl like you Fu can calm it down, but if you hit it a few times, it won't dare to be aggressive. Kui Zioan didn't know Song Yafu, so she said softly, is it your woman's goose? Then it can't be stewed. I'm still thinking of making a pot of goose soup. Su Buling waved his hand quickly, it can't be stewed. If you stew it, Yafu must stew me. It's good to keep it as a playmate. Kui Zioan saw the big white goose standing helplessly outside the dog cage, so she put it aside for the time being. She leaned the stick against the wall, then ran back to the wooden house, took out a teacup and teapot, and brought out a plate of melon seeds. She sat down next to the recliner and pointed to the other recliner. Su Xian lifted up White Snake's quilt, what did you see? Looking at the eager look, it was obvious that he had been waiting all day long. Su Buling sat back on the recliner and continued yesterday's topic, I saw a big white snake with a thick waist, white scales all over its body, and red fangs. It frightened Su Xian to the point of splitting his liver and gallbladder, and he was so scared that he died on the spot. The spring breeze blows in the sea of flowers, and the wind chimes on the eaves jingle. Kui Zioan sat sideways on the recliner, pouring tea and peeling melon seeds. She listened to Su Buling's story seriously as she did yesterday, and occasionally asked questions she didn't understand. It's just that Su Buling is about to lead the army on an expedition, so he can no longer drink tea and tell stories as leisurely as yesterday. When it comes to Whitesnake stealing fairy grass to save Su Xianho, he no longer throws away the introduction to leave suspense, and instead says, Miss Kui, news came from Chang'an City yesterday that the Emperor urgently summoned the Ziliang army to enter the pass to quell the rebellion of the Three Kings in the east, and instructed me to take command. I'm afraid I will leave Ziliang and enter the pass in the next 2 days. I can't tell you this in a short time. Kui Zioan was mentally prepared, but she was still a little disappointed in her eyes. She withdrew her gaze, leaned on the lounge chair, and turned to look at the sea of flowers outside. The purpose of fighting is to avoid fighting. I know the importance of it. Just don't get ahead of yourself like the Emperor. Su Buling shook his head and said, the Emperor and I are not the same kind of people. I care more about my family. However, no matter how fast the rebellion is, it will take a lot of time. Just marching from Suzhou to Chang'an will take more than 1 or 2 months. If you meet the troops of the Three Kings in the east and attack each other's cities, you can't tell how long it will take. It could be as short as 1 or 2 years, or as long as 7 or 8 years. Miss Kui, you. Kui Zioan smiled and said, just worry about fighting and don't worry about me. I've been in the mountains for so many years and it's fine. It's the same here. Su Buling hesitated a little, but Kui Zioan liked to live alone, so he couldn't say much, so he smiled and said, then I'll try to go as early as possible and come back as early as possible. Well, go to hell. No, I hope the young master will return in triumph. Haha, let me borrow some good words from the girl. Su Buring smiled and didn't stay. He stood up and jumped off the terrace, heading towards the outskirts of the sea of flowers. Kui Zioan leaned on the recliner and watched the figure in white getting further and further away. She felt that the scene was a bit similar to that dusk in the canyon. The smile on her face gradually faded, but she did not say anything. After Su Buling walked far away, he turned around and raised his hand to say goodbye. Kui Zioan also raised her hand and shook it. After Su Burang disappeared at the end of the sea of flowers, she stood up. As usual, she picked up a small hoe and shovel and began to tidy up the endless sea of flowers outside the terrace. But not long after, Eunuch Chia, who was fishing by Yuanyang Lake, came back, stood behind Kui Zioan, and looked in the direction where Su Buling disappeared. A war doesn't happen overnight. I'm afraid it won't be easy for the girl to wait once we leave. Kui Zioan did not raise her head and carefully dug the flower seedlings. What should I wait for him to do? If you are bored, you can go to Queen Mother and Miss Ning, or you can go to Miss Jeju to tell stories, or you can go to the hot springs. There are many things you can do. Eunuch Chia folded his sleeves with his hands, shook his head and said, he took away all the women around him and left you here alone. Kui Zioan made a movement with her hands and turned her head. He went out to fight. Why did he bring a woman with him? Eunuch Chia looked a little helpless. I don't know, I don't know. Everyone has left, leaving only the 2 of us, 2 dogs and a goose. It doesn't seem to be very interesting. Miss Kui, do you think you should go back to Yuzhu or follow? Kui Zioan was silent for a moment, inserted a small shovel into the ground, and said a little unhappy, I thought he left his family in Suzhou. I just said that because he was afraid of embarrassment for him. I have already told him not to leave, and I can't go back on my word. Now what to do? Eunuch Chia understood the meaning and sighed softly, old slave, let's think of a way. I originally wanted to bury it here, but it seems I have no chance. Just come back after the battle. Well. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 635. Fast forward 3 days later. Outside Suzhou City, several carriages loaded with maids and family members set out early to board the ship in Lanzhou under the escort of cavalry troops. Zhu Manzi was riding on a brown horse chasing the wind. He was a little uninterested and took out the telescope on his waist to look into the distance from time to time. A large group of border troops were drawn from the surrounding area and kept gathering on the far wall. Black flags were waving and war drums were thundering. From the telescope, you could see a white-haired man in a python robe pointing his sword to the southeast on the high platform. The convoy was strong, and Xiao Qi was sitting in King Su's chariot. A sand table map had been placed in the large carriage, and several aides were discussing the current situation carefully. Although Song Yafu doesn't know much about literature, Taoism, or martial arts, her father is the sage of calligraphy in chess, calligraphy, and painting, and his calligraphy is very good. At this time, he is serving as Xiao Qi's little secretary, carefully recording various arrangements. Lu Hongluan was a typical wealthy lady. She only knew how to run the house and knew nothing about fighting. At this time, she was staying in the carriage with Yunu, sewing clothes and shoes for Su Buletin Ling. She was used to running around here and there in the past year, so she didn't feel bored at all. There are many people outside when going out, so Xiao Xiang'er can't show up with Xiao Qi at the same time, and she's not very good at being a female celebrity, so she can only stay in the carriage where the windows can't be opened, and keep warm with Jiao Yi. Xiao Xiang'er and Su Buling have been sleeping together for the longest time. Apart from being bullied by the stinky brother, they have no other interests. The thought of being together for an unknown amount of time makes her feel uncomfortable. At this time, he was leaning lazily in the carriage, playing with the wooden artillery model, and sighing from time to time, which was even more miserable than when he was alone in the palace. Jiao Yi and Xiao Xiang'er were together day and night, so they understood what their young lady was thinking. After thinking about it, she comforted her. "Miss, you don't have to worry. The young prince will definitely miss you and will come back to visit you soon. The queen is so pitiful. She is left alone in the sea of flowers, and she doesn't know how long she will stay." When Xiao Xiang'er heard this, she also sighed. Xiao Wan has a withdrawn temperament and likes to live alone. She is used to it. She can't follow her anywhere. And she can't follow, otherwise Su Buling will definitely eat from the bowl and look at the pot. When I was in the palace, I was Zioan's mother-in-law, and she still calls her that, if I am allowed to find a chance. When Xiao Xiang'er said this, she felt uncomfortable all over. Jiao Yi had heard and seen that, and she had long been used to strange things in that regard. At this time, she joked, "That's right, if Queen Kui also becomes a couple with the young prince likes to treat you like a lady, pull them together. From now on, in the boudoir, if Empress Kui calls her Miss Mother." Xiao Xiang'er narrowed her eyes slightly. "Jiao Yi, do you believe that I will choose someone outside to marry you right now?" Jiao Yi's expression changed. She quickly became serious, shook her head and said, "My maid is just joking." Xiao Xiang'er was satisfied and snorted lightly. But thinking of the poor woman who was left alone in the sea of flowers, she still felt a little uneasy. After all, the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law were in trouble. At this moment, she only hoped that Zioan could live happily alone. Outside Suzhou City, the Ziliang frontier troops, who were the first to gather from all over the country, formed an orderly formation on the Gobi Desert, with swords and spears held high in their hands. Their soldiers were well fed and their horses were full of momentum. The crosswind swept the black flag, and the sword gleamed like snow under the scorching sun. Su Wangsuyu was dressed in a python robe, standing on a high platform, holding a long sword, and loudly delivered an oath of loyalty. Su Buling rarely wore jet black armor, with red tassels fluttering in the wind. The wind-chasing horse stood calmly, and the black horse with a length of 8 feet lay in front of the army. He said nothing, but his single-handed momentum seemed to be able to suppress tens of thousands of troops were present. Yang Zunyi also held a horse stick and stood behind Su Buling, looking at the tall figure in front of him. Although he was a veteran who had been on the battlefield for many years and had much higher qualifications than Su Buling, he couldn't help but be convinced in his eyes. In the world, there are 8 deserts and 6 regions. There are different opinions on famous generals. Zhou Qingkai of northern Qi, Wang Qinjai of western Liaoning, Guo Zhongxian of Guangzhou, and even Yang Zunyi. Before the victory or defeat is determined, it is difficult to say who is superior, because famous generals focus on strategic planning, and they cannot be regarded as generals if they have never fought in a war. Take these 2 words. But in terms of strong generals, there is probably no one in the 3 kingdoms of the world who can be more powerful than the young prince in front of him. Su Buling dared to go out alone at a young age and beheaded more than 100 people without any injuries. He was already very fierce. I have not been in the military for the past 2 years, but what I have done has brought the word fierce to the extreme. Taiji Palace defeats the envoys from the northern Qi dynasty, climbs the dragon platform to kill the emperor, holds Prince Zhou's birthday banquet in Black City, rides alone in Hongshan Lake to kill water bandits, Yuzhu fights against the top 10 warriors, captures the leader of thieves among thousands of troops in Taiyuan. This is only on the surface. No matter what it is, if it is done to ordinary people, it is enough to make the martial arts famous Daio spread all over the world. As for Su Buling's current reputation, even though he has not fought in a big battle on the battlefield, he is already a household name and well known to everyone. When Su Buling's name is mentioned, the first impression is that he is invincible. This is especially true among the Ziliang border troops. Every time news comes, King Su will tell the border troops what Su Buling has done. There is no need to add fuel and jealousy to the Ziliang soldiers. He was stunned for a moment, and the image in his mind was almost as good as that of Lao Su Wang Su Lai. In ancient times, when marching and fighting, the most important thing is morale. With morale as strong as a rainbow, even if you are wearing old armor and blunt armor, you will still be victorious in every battle. The morale of the soldiers was low. Even with the best weapons and horses, they still collapsed at the first touch. And there is a general in front who can kill gods and kill Buddhas. You can imagine how much morale will be improved. Under normal circumstances, young men from military families have to start from the grassroots level when they lead troops for the first time, so as to avoid being directly appointed as commanders. The soldiers in the army are not convinced or have no confidence, and they are timid in fighting. However, Su Buling had only been a scout team leader before, and suddenly he was appointed to lead 50,000 elite border troops from Ziliang. The soldiers from top to bottom did not think there was a problem. All the deputy generals behind Yang Zunyi were fierce men who had been tempered on the battlefield for many years. Some of them dared to talk back to him. At this time, Su Buling stood in front, and these brave and unparalleled generals became nervous. They sat upright on horseback, fearing that they would be looked down upon by the young prince. In the army, those who are capable are arrogant, and no one is unconvinced. They were all hung up and beaten in horsemanship, archery, spear and stick skills, fists and feet, etc. When the young prince in front of him got ruthless, there were so many generals present, plus Yang Zunyi and Tu Qianchu next to him, they were probably not enough to beat him. What else can he say except to be convinced? Seeing the soldiers under his command so imposing and eager to follow His Royal Highness the Crown Prince out and charge recklessly, Yang Zunyi's worries also vanished. The marching arrangements and military strategies were studied by the deputy commanders and military advisors. As the commander-in-chief, Su Buling was responsible for the word commander. As long as the soldiers did not have the commander's flag in their hearts, there would be no problem. On the high platform, Su Wang Suyu finished his oath, and Su Buling drove his horse forward and took the tiger seal from Su Wang Suyu. Then he drew his sword and pointed to the southeast. Move camp. Tiger! 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 The drums were like thunder, and the shouts went straight to the sky. After saying goodbye to Su Wang Suyu, Su Buling turned his horse's head and led the vanguard troops to move camp one by one. Volume 8, The Beacon Fire Chapter, End. Volume 9, The Broken Front Blood Cavalry Chapter. The cold front alone shocked Zijing, and the unparalleled blood cavalry broke Longcheng. Please stay tuned. Thanks to the Silver Alliance reward from the big guy, the wind blows and the flowers fall and the rain keeps. Currently owed 241/574, I hope I can pay it off in the next book. The detailed outline has been written, and the update will be accelerated soon. Big guys, please give a heart and a thumbs up to the Queen Mother baby. There is an event, and she is the first on the goddess list. Oh. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 636. Luz Hu, King Fenggang. Li Hanzhong looked at the countryside below the mountain with a slightly sad face. The spring breeze awakens all things, and the birds and beasts that have been dormant for the whole winter become active in the countryside again. Also appearing are tens of thousands of soldiers, with no beginning in front and no end behind. They continue to gather and grow, heading towards the distant west. Sword Master Zulu stood beside him and said softly, "The King of Chu, Song Zhengping, has just announced to the world that he supports the King of Wu in impeaching the Emperor, and he has officially turned to the three Eastern kings. The four kings have secretly reached an agreement, and after deposing the Emperor, they will discussing who will inherit the throne. It seems that the situation is not good. Li Hanzhong and Zulu, as well as all the disciples of Daying Tower, all have blood feuds without exception. Jianghu people pay blood debts with blood. Li Hanzhong has been dormant in secret for so many years. He must be doing more than just changing the emperor. He wants to destroy the Song family. The reason for taking refuge in the King of Wu was that the King of Wu had lost his beloved son and had become disloyal to the court. Li Hanzhong supported the rise of King Wu in order to drag down the three Eastern kings, causing a civil war between the imperial court and the three Eastern kings. At the same time, he secretly used the internal forces trained in Ningguoguan to cooperate with the internal and external forces to allow the Northern Qi army to enter the pass. This matter has been planned since very early. Last year, Chang Shijian was asked to ask Prince Zhou of Northern Qi for a jade pendant. Prince Zhou Zhang would agree because Li Hanzhong was already connected to Northern Qi. As long as the goal is achieved, according to Li Hanzhen's calculation, the Daio court will definitely be under great pressure when faced with the three kings of Northern Qi and the East who have been working hard for 60 years. They will win over the two kings of Chu and Su to compete, and the entire world will become a three-kingdom. The potential of division. Daio's court relied on the two kings of Chu and Su, and its military strength was strong. Facing the three kings of Northern Qi and the East at the same time, it would not fall into decline. The three parties fell into a tug-of-war until Daio's national power was almost exhausted, and Li Hanzhong led Liu again. The rebels who rose up joined forces with the Northern Qi dynasty to stab Daio in the back, thus achieving the goal of destroying the Song family. But the current situation obviously did not follow the route planned by Li Hanzhong. Li Hanzhong originally thought that the court would win over the King of Chu, but the King of Chu turned around and formed an alliance with the King of Wu because of the emperor's tough attitude. The troops summoned by the three kings of Wu, Wei, and Yu, plus the strong men and militia recruited at odd hours, totaled 700,000 people. If the 300,000 soldiers of the King of Chu were added, the number of troops would directly exceed 1 million. As for the imperial court, the King of Shu had just suffered a major disaster and could be ignored. The only available troops at his disposal were the Ziliang Army, the Guanzhong Army, and the Western Liaoning Army. If the Guanzhong Army and the Western Liaoning Army were to stop the Northern Qi from moving south, the imperial court would not allow the Northern Qi to move south. Even if the vassal king succeeds in usurping the throne, it is impossible to withdraw the two armies. The only army that can be used to block the coalition of four kings is the Ziliang army. If the entire Ziliang army attacked, they would naturally be able to stop the four kings coalition. However, if all the Ziliang army left, the entire northwest would be lost. In the end, the court only mobilized 50,000 Ziliang troops. 50,000 Ziliang troops, plus the government soldiers and militiamen from Guanzhong, came to stop the coalition of four kings with more than 1 million troops. No matter what Li Hanzhong thought, the court could not stop them. If the imperial court cannot stop this and the four kings successfully march to Chang'an, then the next step will definitely be the Song dynasty and the Zhen throne, the new king ascending the throne, and the integration of troops and horses to counter-attack the northern Qi dynasty. After all, Dayu will still be surnamed Song, and the northern Qi dynasty will have to go back to the desert. North. After the world is peaceful, Li Hanzhong will no longer talk about revenge, but he will probably have to follow the dragon to fulfill his dream of learning martial arts and repaying the emperor's family. If his biological daughter and deceased wife knew about this, wouldn't he really become a ruthless beast who abandoned his wife and daughter? Sword Master Zulu was charged with the blood feud of annihilating his family, so he was definitely not willing to help the feudal king seek hegemony. Faced with the situation in front of him, he asked, "What should we do in the future? Is it possible to pull the rebels and ask the court to recruit them to help block the four vassal kings?" This is of course a joke. The rebel army in Jiangnan only has a total of more than 200,000 stragglers. They cannot defect now and pursue the four kings alliance. Li Hanzhong was silent for a moment, shook his head and said, "With the general situation being like this, it depends on whether Su Buling can stop the four kings from entering Guanzhong. As long as Su Buling can block it for a year and a half, Northern Qi can gain a firm foothold north of the Yellow River and still be able to survive some were beaten." Zulu rubbed the hilt of his sword with his fingers and raised his eyes to the northwest. Only 50,000 Ziliang troops, plus a bunch of useless government soldiers, can stop the four kings and millions of people. As my father-in-law, I can't help. Busy, alas, we who are just messing around in the world really can't take advantage of the general trend of the world. Li Hanzhong knew that Zulu, Dong Hailu family and other Jianghu forces were a little disappointed, but it was not easy to disrupt the world's situation. He turned around and walked down the mountain, calmly saying, "In troubled times, the situation changes rapidly. We wait for opportunities before we move. There will always be a comeback." Zulu was just a swordsman and didn't know much about the general trend of the world. He could only nod his head, thought for a while and said, "Su Buletinling can single-handedly fight with 1,000, but if he leads an army in battle, he might be able to fight with 100. If the Ziliang army of 50,000 is worth 100, it will be 5 million. They can push directly from Guanzhong Road to Jiangnan. If we kill the Song family again, will this matter be over? If that kid can be pushed to the south of the Yangtze River with 50,000 people, I will call him father-in-law from now on. Once the Jianghu people say something, it's hard to follow the horse, so it's settled." 3,000 miles away, 50,000 Ziliang troops were mobilized from various places and gathered together. The army was not marching very fast and had just left the territory of Yangzhou. Xiao Qi took her family members to leave first and had already arrived at the dock by the Wei River. Wang Fula's ships docked here, and there was a lot of construction work near the dock, with thousands of people working there. Work started around the clock during the wartime situation, and with the strong financial resources accumulated by Prince Su's mansion for many years, in just over 10 days, the arms workshop covering an area of 100 acres has gradually taken shape. Senior blacksmiths, carpenters, masons, etc. hired with huge sums of money from the 12 prefectures of Ziliang have been trained by Tian Qishan in a building built nearby. Xiao Qi had a restless temper, and when she arrived at the dock, she went to the arms workshop to start inspection work. Zhu Manzi and Song Yufu were suffocated on the carriage, and had been on the ship for half a year, so they had no interest in going back directly. After taking the boat, they went to the town near the dock together. Lu Hongluan was a little bored, so he also went shopping together to relax. Xiao Xiang on the other hand, did not receive such a good treatment. She and her sister shared the identity of the crown princess. Naturally, she could not show up when her sister went out. She could only return to the ship obediently and wait for Xiao Qi to complete her inspection and set sail. In the building and boat, the maids were getting ready inside and outside. On the terrace at the very back of the boat building, Xiao Xiang leaned slightly lazily, playing with the small mahogany sign in his hand and basking in the little spring sun. Bian Bian and Su Buling had been separated for more than 10 days. Xiao Xiang naturally missed the days when her good brother was by her side. She wanted to squint her eyes and sleep for a while but couldn't, so she asked. Chiao Yi, how long will it take for Su Buletinling to come back? Chiao Yi sat next to her, envying Yunu for being able to go out for a walk. She sighed after hearing this. The boat is moving quickly. We will wait near Chang'an first. The young prince has just left Yangzhou, which is still more than 1,000 miles away from Chang'an. Tens of thousands of people are walking together slowly, and it will take half a month at least. Xiao Xiang was a little desperate, leaning on the couch listlessly, and began to think about what kind of surprise she should give Su Buling when the time comes. How about writing "I am your aunt" under Hongluan's belly? While I was thinking about it, there were footsteps in the room behind me. It seemed like a woman came in with something in her arms, put it down, and walked out again. Thinking that it was the maid moving things, Xiao Xiang and Chiao Yi didn't pay attention, but a moment later, 2 goose calls of quacking suddenly came from behind. Chiao Yi was confused when she heard the sound, and looked back, only to see the big white goose lying upright on the floor of the outer room with its wings and claws tied. Hey, who is this maid? Why did you bring the poultry here? Chiao Yi looked a little annoyed and was about to get up to discipline the maid who didn't understand the rules. Suddenly she saw a woman entering the room leading 2 puppies. The woman is wearing a gray-blue skirt, with a scarf on her head. Her eyes are full of spirit, her lips are as red as cherry blossoms, and her eyebrows are like willow leaves. She has a unique charm of a young woman from a good family. Chiao Yi was a palace maid before. She was startled when she saw the appearance of the visitor. She stood up instinctively, folded her hands on her waist and bowed, but she immediately felt something was wrong and opened her mouth in shock. In the room, Kui Zioan let go of the dog leash, closed the door, and raised her hand to untie the scarf on her head. When he noticed that Chiao Yi was looking over, Kui Zioan didn't feel anything strange at all, so he naturally nodded slightly. Chiao Yi is excused. Mother, I will stay here for a while. Do you prefer to sleep inside or outside? The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 637. On the terrace, Xiao Xiang who was rubbing the mahogany sign, suddenly heard Kui Zioan's voice. His whole body froze, and he blinked his beautiful eyes, as if he was wondering if he had fallen asleep and was dreaming. When Kui Zioan saw that her mother didn't respond, she smiled. I can sleep on the couch. Mother, you don't need to disturb other people. Su Buling and I couldn't tell each other, but we still came. When Su Buling comes back, I will tell him first. If he finds it troublesome, I will go back. That's it? Xiao Xiang finally came to her senses, sat up from the terrace, and looked back into the house. However, she could only see 2 shivering puppies huddled in the corner of the house, and one crawling on the carpet, opening its mouth wide and trying to bite. Dog's big white goose. Zioan, you, how did you? Xiao Xiang'er was a little confused. Kui Zioan walked into the back room, took off the small package on her shoulder, opened it, and put the change of clothes into the closet. Hearing Xiao Xiang'er's voice, she responded. When I was in Suzhou, Su Buling told me a story, and he was about to go out to fight in the middle of the story. I thought he didn't have any family members, and I thought he could find Miss Jeju to continue telling the story, so I didn't follow him. I didn't expect you all to follow. Let's go, my mother knows my temperament and likes to get to the bottom of things, so she came here. Just to tell stories. For nothing else? Xiao Xiang'er obviously didn't believe it. She stood up, walked into the room, and looked at Kui Zioan who was packing up next to the closet. How did you come here alone after such a long journey? Lao Jia sent me here. He is staying in the cabin below. Oh. Xiao Xiang'er nodded and wanted to say something more, but her head was buzzing and she couldn't find the topic for a while. Kui Zioan sorted out her belly bands, trousers, and skirts, and placed them neatly. She stood up and looked at Ruan Tuo, and found a few small objects thrown randomly on the small case, as well as tools such as carving knives next to them. Kui Zioan has a bit of obsessive-compulsive disorder and likes to tidy everything up neatly and meticulously. She felt a little awkward, so she walked over to help tidy up. When Xiao Xiang'er saw this scene, her face turned red suddenly, and she ran forward in a hurry. No, no, I. He tried to stop him incoherently, but it was already too late. Kui Zioan came to the small case and picked up the rabbit tail prepared for Yufu. It was a fluffy little round ball with snow-white fur and was very soft to hold. The cone shape carved out of the wood at the top had just been polished and was very smooth to the touch. Kui Zioan pinched the little fur ball curiously and asked. Mother, what are you doing? Chiao's face turned red, she hesitated, then secretly left the room with the goose and the dog. Xiao Xiang'er's cheeks were full of embarrassment. She walked forward and wanted to snatch the rabbit's tail away, but she didn't dare to show too much panic. She raised her hand. Well, this is just a decoration, just for fun. Kui Zioan has always been a person who wants to get to the bottom of things. She clearly realized that her mother was lying, and the excuse she gave was unconvincing, so she continued to ask curiously. Where is it placed? This thing seems to be unstable. Then he sat down on the couch and tried to put the rabbit's tail on the table to stand upright, but it was obviously impossible to stand upright. No matter how you say it, Xiao Xiang'er is Kui Zioan's mother-in-law. She always puts herself in the position of an elder and never dares to hint at her purpose. She sat down next to Kui Zioan in a dignified manner, her heart was racing, and she said with a smile. It's placed in a flower pot. When you put it in the flower pot, it looks really nice. Yeah. Kui Zioan looked at the rabbit tail carefully and thought it should be stuck on something. She turned to look at the two pots of daisies on the terrace, eager to try. Xiao Xiang'er spent many days working hard to make it. He definitely couldn't really insert it into the daisy, so he quickly raised his hand and said. This thing is troublesome to make. You have to find beautiful flowers. Let's talk about it later. Seeing this, Kui Zioan had to give up the idea, pinched the rabbit tail in her hand, and smiled. Can Queen Mother give this to me? Well, I'll give you the seeds in exchange. Kui Zioan took off the purse from her waist, poured out a few seeds from it, and handed it to Xiao Xiang'er. This is the seed of Wuden Rose. I searched for it for a long time in Suzhou before I left Suzhou. I bought it from the Hu people. They said it is only found in the far west of the western regions. The flowers are very beautiful. There are no such flowers in you. Well. Xiao Xiang'er knew that Kui Zioan loved flowers like crazy. These seeds must be very precious to Kui Zioan, but how could this be exchanged? If Xiao Wan really puts this thing in a flower pot. Xiao Xiang'er shuddered. Kui Zioan realized that Xiao Xiang'er didn't want to agree, and her face showed a bit of disappointment, and she put the rabbit tail back on the table. I'm just saying it casually. Mother, you don't need to take it seriously. Xiao Xiang'er was not a woman who was ignorant of the world. She was afraid that Xiao Wan would misunderstand her reluctance to let go, so she quickly said. No. It's just a small object, just give it to you. But, just keep it secretly, let Hongluan and sister see it, and they will be greedy and force me to make these for them. Thank you, Queen Mother. Kui Zioan picked up the rabbit tail and put it on the side of her legs. In a blink of an eye, she looked at the golden quail eggs on the table, ready to continue packing them away. Xiao Xiang'er's scalp was numb, and he hurriedly collected all the messy objects, threw them into the toolbox, and said with a smile. Xiao Wan, you have already come out of the palace. There is no distinction between elder and younger. Just have a good rest and I will take care of it myself. Kui Zioan nodded obediently. Thank you, Mother. Xiao Xiang'er felt uncomfortable all over. After hiding the treasure, she changed the subject. Zioan, you want to hear a story, right? I've heard a lot from Su Buling. Anyway, it's okay. I'll tell you. What did he tell you? Kui Zioan's eyes lit up. She was almost driven crazy by the dog who broke the chapters these days. She hurriedly said. Last time he talked about stealing the fairy grass, but I knew he was leaving at that time, so I didn't listen carefully. Mother, please start from the place where White Snake drank realgar wine. Xiao Xiang'er was stunned and sat down next to Kui Zioan, her eyes weird. He told you this? Did you listen to it? Kui Zioan leaned on the couch, smiling. It's just a story, not supernatural, nothing to be afraid of. Xiao Xiang'er frowned, recalled the story she told Su Buling before, and whispered. Well, Su Buxian lifted the curtain. Kui Zioan blinked. Su Buxian. Xiao Xiang'er nodded. Well, yes, what's wrong? Kui Zioan hesitated. Nothing, Mother, continue. Su Buxian lifted the curtain, but saw that in the bed, White Snake's cheeks were flushed and her clothes were half undressed. Kui Zioan frowned. She was different from ordinary girls since she was a child. Her cheeks did not blush with shyness, but her eyes were full of doubts. After listening for a while, she raised her hand and said. Mother, what you said seems to be different from what he said. Xiao Xiang'er stopped talking, thinking that she had hidden a lot of vulgar words, which Kui Zioan heard. She smiled awkwardly. Really? What did he tell you? Kui Zioan thought about it and said seriously, he said that when Su Xian opened the curtain, he saw that Bai Niangzi turned into a big white snake with a waist as thick as that. Xiao Xiang'er was a little confused. Didn't she turn into a snake after the incident? Kui Zioan was even more confused. What do you mean after the incident? Xiao Xiang'er's face gradually turned red, until it turned as red as a small apple. Facing the innocent eyes of her daughter-in-law, she gritted her teeth and muttered. This bastard has lost all conscience. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gongzi. Chapter 638. The silver moon is like a hook, and the bright moonlight shines on the wild Gobi Desert in the northwest. Tens of thousands of black armors set up camp on the Gobi Desert, and the lights extend to the end of the sky. The military flags can be seen in the distance. In the general tent in the middle of the Ziliang army camp, Su Buling changed into an ordinary white robe, stood in front of the map, and discussed the situation that had just been reported with many generals. Nightingale sat at the desk as a secretary, recording the minutes of the meeting. According to the rules, in wartime, armor never leaves the general's body, and saddle never leaves the horse's back, and the commander should be more so. However, for a warrior of Su Buling's level, Armor is only useful when parading and showing off. When fighting, what the armor can defend can be avoided, and what the armor cannot defend can also be avoided. Wearing armor will increase the weight and affect the skills, which will greatly reduce the combat effectiveness, so this rule is naturally not to be followed. Except for Su Buling, Nightingale, and military advisor Yu Julu, Tu Qinchu and Yang Zunyi who were present were all wearing black armor, with tiger head-shaped shoulder guards on both sides, which was a unique symbol of the Ziliang army. There were also 4 people who were the 4 great King Kongs under Yang Zunyi, Yang Guanyu, Zhang He, Lu Yun, and Su Ying. These 4 people are the best of the younger generation in the Ziliang army. Yang Guanyu is the son of Yang Zunyi, nicknamed Second Idiot. Together with Su Buling, he was thrown into the border army when he was just over 10 years old and lived and ate with the soldiers. Although Yang Guanyu's combat power is not as terrifying as Su Buling, his skills are definitely not bad. He is also a first-class fierce man in the army. His figure is like a polar bear, and he is 1 head taller than Su Buling. Zhang He and Lu Yun are also descendants of Ziliang generals. When their ancestors founded the country, they followed the great general Su Lai to conquer the world. Although they were born in a family of generals, they were not ignorant like ordinary second-generation descendants. They were the best among the younger generation in terms of military strategy and personal bravery. However, they had never experienced a major war before. This time, they were pulled out by their fathers to fight with Su Buling. Among the 4, Su Ying was born in the lower class. He was tall and dark-skinned. He certainly did not look as imposing as those who had been in high positions for a long time, but he was only 30 years old and could hold this position. He must be the most powerful among the 4. The last time Prince Su led his army out of Qinzhou to attack Wangnan Pass of northern Qi, it was Su Ying who was the vanguard and led 1,000 elite cavalry alone to penetrate deep into the enemy's heart to intercept reinforcements. As a result, Su Ying led 1,000 people to the city of Yuanzhou and rushed into the heart of the Qi army, causing unrest around Yuanzhou city. Prince Su was able to kill to the city of Yuanzhou so quickly, thanks to Su Ying's bravery. After the war, Su Ying was directly promoted to his current position and was nicknamed Gan Lang. Su Buling admired Su Ying the most among his peers. Su Buling was fierce in that his single-player combat power was unstoppable, and he could easily crush anyone. He had to be fierce. Su Ying, on the other hand, was really ruthless, and did not take his life seriously at all. He was very good at fighting, but his intelligence was not low either. He was brave and resourceful. Before leaving, even the king of Su had told Su Buling not to use people indiscriminately and send Su Ying away for nothing, which showed how much the king of Su valued him. At this time, the discussion among the people was about the king of Chu's defection to the 3 kings in the east. The king of Chu's jumping into opposition would definitely have a great impact on the situation. Without the king of Chu, the Ziliang army could basically only rely on the palace soldiers pulled from Guangzhou, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that they were fighting alone. However, before the troops were dispatched, Xiao Qi had already guessed the next move and the reaction of various forces, and also gave countermeasures. At this point, it seemed that the plan was basically perfect and there was nothing to discuss. After Su Buling learned about the recent moves, he dispersed the meeting and asked the 7 people to return to the military tent to rest, and to speed up the march to Guangzhou tomorrow. The Ziliang army had strict discipline and laws, and there was no noise in the camp, only the occasional black armored soldiers patrolling back and forth, and the friction of armor made a light sound. Outside the tent with lights on, 2 guards in light armor stood at the entrance of the tent with their swords on their waists. They were tall and straight, and looked very heroic. The only shortcoming was that they were much thinner than the rough men of the Ziliang army, and their chest muscles were more developed than ordinary men. Many generals came out of the tent. Ning Qingyi and Ning Yu closed their eyes and did not look sideways. After the generals walked away, they relaxed a little and looked at the moon in the sky with a little boredom. After all, the most useless thing in the world is probably Su Buling's guards. Ning Qingyi followed Su Buling to the war, and unlike Zhongli Jiju, who had medical skills and could be the prince's military doctor, he naturally had the title of a personal soldier. Originally, Su Buling asked Ning Qingyi to stay in the tent, and there was no need to really stand guard. But Ning Qingyi has a straightforward personality. He does his job well and doesn't want to take his salary and do nothing. He will stand here seriously every day until Chu comes to change his shift. Ning Yuhi has nothing to do in the military tent. There is nothing wrong with being closer to Su Buling, so he naturally follows. Seeing that the negotiation is over and the military tent is quiet, Ning Yuhi secretly glanced behind him. Perhaps he wanted to comfort his disciple who had been busy all day, and said softly, "King Yi, it's getting late. You go down and rest. I will help you stand." Ning Qingyi stood straight. He calculated the time. It was still a while before the shift change. He shook his head and said, "Master, you don't have to accompany me. Just go down and rest." Seeing this, Ning Yuhi had to give up the idea of serving Su Buling and smiled. "Then I will go back first, and you should rest early too." "Master, don't worry. I will go back and rest when the time comes." Ning Yuhi nodded slightly and walked away slowly. Ning Qingyi's expression was calm as he watched his master walk away. After his figure disappeared in the military tent, he blinked, glanced back quietly, and then coughed lightly. Cough. In the commander's tent, Su Buling, who was looking at the file, raised his eyelids when he heard the voice. "Come in." Ning Qingyi glanced around a few times, and after making sure that no one was paying attention, he turned around and entered the general's tent. The temporary general's tent was where Su Buling usually rested during meetings. It was not luxurious, but considering his status as the prince of a vassal king, it was not shabby. There was a weapon rack hanging on the side, with horse lances, foot lances, knives, spears, and swords hanging on it, and a set of black armor was placed next to it. Behind the screen was a bed, with a few small tables on both sides, and a map placed in the middle. Nightingale had finished her work and was stretching her muscles in the general's tent. When she saw Ning Qingyi coming in, she walked outside with a tactful look. "Sir, I'll go boil some water." Su Buling put down the file and said with a smile, "King Yi, is there anything?" Ning Qingyi was wearing light armor, but she was tall and straight, and her face was even more delicate. She looked as beautiful as ever, and she also added a bit of heroic spirit that was as good as a man. She walked up to Su Buling and said calmly, "Did I disturb you from your work?" "No, I've finished it." Su Buling sat a little to the side and patted the seat beside him. "Come and sit down." Ning Qingyi didn't move, standing in front of the table, his hand still on the handle of the knife, his eyes narrowed. "What? You want to practice Tai Chi push hands with me again?" Su Buling nodded, "Yes, I've been learning Tai Chi and other internal martial arts recently. There is a key to receiving, transforming, and releasing that I can't figure out. You just happened to tell me about it. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 639. I don't know Tai Chi. Ning Qingyi didn't believe Su Buling's nonsense, saying it was a hair extension. As long as she stuck to it, she probably wouldn't be pushed out, and she might be taken advantage of. However, Ning Qingyi refused, but still came to Su Buling's side, sat down next to him, and asked, "I heard you talking about Jiangnan just now, what is Li Hanzhong doing now?" "Li Hanzhong has pulled up a rebel army, and he is probably looking for an opportunity for King Wu to recruit troops. However, the number of rebels is not large, and the soldiers are uneven. It has no impact on the overall situation at present. Ning Qingyi nodded and was about to continue asking when her eyes suddenly turned cold. Su Buletinling spent the whole day hanging out with rough guys and leading the march. It was hard to find time to talk about business. He turned his head and looked at it for a few times, then suddenly raised his hand and knocked twice on Ning Qingyi's breastplate, making two soft dong-dong sounds. Ning Qingyi felt nothing, but this action was obviously a bit obscene. She said coldly, "What you do?" Su Buletinling looked seriously, "Try to see how the armor's protective power is. It feels like the quality is quite good." Ning Qingyi lowered his head and looked down, "It looks like an iron shell. Don't you mind having your hands pinched?" Seeing that Ning Qingyi had no intention of resisting, Su Buling raised his palm again and pinched the breastplate. It felt a bit irritating and not elastic at all. Ning Qingyi was cut all over, and she was wearing light armor anyway, even her neck was covered tightly, and she didn't bother to stop it. Su Buling squeezed it for a long time, and it was cold and hard without any warmth. Naturally, he lost interest and withdrew his hand. Ning Qingyi raised her hand and patted her breastplate, "Are you satisfied?" Su Buling didn't blush at all and said with a smile, "You are good at martial arts, but wearing armor will affect your skills. Why don't you take it off in the future, and I will find you some softer clothes. You think beautifully." Ning Qingyi sat a little further away and continued to ask, "Is Li Hanzhong planning to follow King Wu and fight to Chang'an to kill the emperor?" Su Buling sat closer, held Ning Qingyi's unprotected little hand, shook his head and said, "I don't know, but he definitely wants revenge. It's not impossible to kill Song Ji in this way." Ning Qingyi was silent for a moment and said softly, "Back then, he was so focused on utilitarianism and thinking about high-ranking officials and generous salaries that he even ignored his wife and children and ran to take the imperial examination. So what if the emperor is destroyed now? Someone surnamed Song is not the emperor yet, but killing the emperor is considered revenge. Your expedition this time seems to be to protect the emperor, right?" Su Buling nodded. "On the side of the imperial court, it is natural to protect the emperor, but the general trend of the world will not be clear for a while." Ning Qingyi never said much about things she didn't understand. She shook her head and said, "The emperor wants to kill you, and you must not obey him. I won't interfere with what you do, I just want to see what Li Hanzhong wants to do. If you are on the battlefield in the future, if you meet me, I will definitely be on your side." Su Buling was naturally moved, but he didn't want to see this kind of decision-making. "Let's talk about the future matters later." Ning Qingyi spoke less. After she finished talking about the business, she stopped talking. Su Buletinling rubbed her hand back and forth, and she wanted to pull it back, but Su Buletinling didn't let go, so she let him hold it. After sitting like this for a while, footsteps were heard outside, and Ning Qingyi pulled her hand back. "It's time to change shifts, I'm going back first." After saying that, he got up and walked out. Su Buling was a little unfinished, so he stood up and sent Ning Qingyi out of the handsome tent. He looked up and saw Zhongli Chuchu, who was also wearing light armor, pulling Zhongli Jiju, who was wearing a long skirt, over. Zhongli Jiju looked very embarrassed and kept whispering along the way, "Chu-chu, I didn't. How can I take it seriously when I talk in my sleep?" Ning Qingyi paused and glanced at Zhongli's master and apprentice with a slightly confused look. "Chu-chu, what's wrong?" Zhongli Chuchu held the master's wrist, his green eyes were obviously a little displeased. He didn't look at Su Buring, and hummed softly. "Just now, my master was talking in his sleep, saying, 'Mr. Please be lighter, Chu-chu is outside, if she hears it, she will have to say something about me. Alas, as a disciple, if I continue to interfere with the master's affairs, I will be in trouble in the future. Maybe she disliked me, so I dragged her over.'" "That's right." Ning Qingyi's eyes were strange, but Zhongli Jiju was Su Buling's concubine, so she couldn't say anything, so she turned around and left. Zhongli Jiju's face turned red and she hurriedly explained, I didn't. I don't talk in my sleep. King Yi, don't take it seriously. Zhongli Chuchu held on to his master, you are asleep, how do you know you are not talking in your sleep? Could it be that I was confused and misunderstood? Zhongli Jiju didn't know whether she was talking in her sleep, but she certainly wouldn't do it under normal circumstances. She took out the little sparrow in her arms. Choo-choo, if you don't believe me, ask her, I must not be talking in my sleep. Zhongli Chuchu's eyes were slightly cold and he looked at the little sparrow. The little sparrow turned its little head and looked at its master who was reluctant to take care of it, and then at Zhongli Chuchu who might take care of it. What other choice could it make? Su Buling was a little funny, but he and Jiju spent a lot of time sleeping together. He knew that Jiju slept very quietly. Maybe Chuchu had misunderstood, so he stepped forward and explained. Chuchu, if your master doesn't talk in his sleep, it's possible that you were hallucinating while you were asleep. Zhongli and Chuchu were sleeping just now and vaguely heard the sentence. At this time, they were not sure whether it was an auditory hallucination. But even if it was a hallucination, she couldn't admit that she was dreaming about those messy things. She is your woman, so you should naturally speak to her. I won't disturb you two enjoying the moonlight and flowers. Let her take the post tonight. After Zhongli Chuchu finished speaking, she pushed Zhongli Jiju to Su Buling, turned around and walked away. Chuchu, Zhongli Jiju was a little worried and called out, but Zhongli Chuchu didn't turn around, but walked faster. Su Buling felt that Chuchu was not angry, so he shook his head and smiled. I guess Chuchu was thinking about it when she was sleeping and heard it wrong. If you tell her now, she will definitely not admit it. Just pretend it didn't happen. Zhongli Jiju felt relieved when she heard it. She looked down and found that Su Buling was hugging her waist. She quickly raised her hand and pushed her gently. Sorry to disturb your rest. I'll go back first. My husband, you should go to bed early too. Su Buling didn't let go, and walked out of the general's tent with Jiju in his arms. We are all here, why are you running back? You still have to help Chuchu take the post, it seems to be the same. Zhongli Jiju missed Su Buling very much, but she still struggled. Husband, there are tens of thousands of people around, don't mess around, if people hear you, it will damage your reputation. Just keep quiet, or husband, be considerate and help you cover your mouth. Zhongli Jiju wanted to say something, but she felt her body lighten, and was picked up and placed on the table. The sky blue skirt was lifted up and covered her face, and she couldn't see anything in an instant. Thank you oxygen bottle for the 20,000 reward for the Queen Mother. Big guys, give the Queen Mother a heart. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 640. The Ziliang army marched towards Guanzhong Road in an orderly manner, while Xiao Qi's building boat sailed down the river and arrived around Chang'an City in advance, waiting for Su Buling's arrival. In the early morning, at the ferry near Qinggui Tower, the tower boat docked at the pier. On the deck, Zhu Manzi was feeling a little bored and was working as an animal trainer, teaching two dogs to deal with the big white geese. It's a pity that the two dogs were too timid and didn't dare to get on. Angrily, Zhu Manzi rolled up his sleeves and demonstrated himself, but was chased by the big white goose and ran away all over the boat. Song Yufu and Lu Hongluan stood together, one looking at Chang'an City in the distance, and the other looking at the northwest. The spring breeze tightened their skirts, outlining their completely different but equally charming figures. As long as Su Buletinling is not around, Lu Hongluan will always be like a stone watching her husband. After looking at her husband for a moment, she said quietly, Yufu, when will your husband-in-law come back? Song Yufu has always respected Lu Hongluan, and her attitude towards her elders has not changed yet. She smiled a little shyly when she heard the voice. You have to ask Sister Kikai about this. I don't know. It should be soon. Lu Hongluan was just waiting in a panic and asked casually. Xiao Qi has been busy with business recently, and she almost doesn't leave the house, forgetting sleep and food. She has no nerve to bother Xiao Qi because of her lovesickness. Seeing Song Yafu looking at Chang'an City, Lu Hongluan guessed that Song Yafu missed her mother's family. This trip was not made public, and he just followed the Ziliang army in a low-key manner. Song Baking was a court official, so it was impossible for Su Buling to take Song Yafu back to Chang'an to pay homage to his father-in-law. Thinking of this, Lu Hongluan comforted him softly. When you come back from the war, your daughter will be able to take you back to your parents' home. Don't worry. Song Yafu missed her father very much, but she also understood the priorities and was not thinking about returning to her parents' home at this time. She hesitated for a moment, then approached Lu Hongluan and whispered. Sister Hongluan, I haven't thought about my mother's family, but, I'm just curious, what is the relationship between Queen Kui and my husband? Queen Kui calls Sister Xiang Queen Mother, and Sister Xiang calls her husband, so what should Queen Kui call her husband? When Lu Hongluan heard this, his eyes looked a little strange. He glanced left and right and whispered. Let me see. Kui Zioan has already boarded the ship. She must have fallen in love with Ling Er. No matter what her status was before, she will be called husband in the future. Song Yafu was still a little puzzled and asked, if Queen Kui is also called Xiang Gong, how should we call Sister Xiang Er? They are legitimate mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Sister Xiang Er also takes care of Queen Kui as a junior. Compared with Sister Kikai, all enthusiastic. How could Lu Hongluan be able to sort out this messy taboo relationship? She shook her head and said. Whoever cares about her, she is the daughter-in-law of my Su family when she enters the door of my Su family. I am also Ling Er's aunt, and I still call Xiang Er aunt. It is not called sister or sister yet. Song Yafu nodded and asked, then what should my husband call the current emperor? According to King Su, he should be called uncle. According to Sister Xiang Er, he should be called stepson. According to Queen Kui. The more Lu Hongluan listened, the more confused she became. She quickly waved her hands and said, don't forget it. If the Holy One knows about this, your child will probably be skinned and cramped. Song Yafu shrank her neck and could not say more. She continued to look at Chang'an City and began to think about this extremely complicated issue. In the room at the back of the building, everything was neatly packed, even the two beddings were folded exactly the same. On the terrace, two deck chairs were placed side by side. Xiao Xianger was holding a teacup and sipping lightly while talking about the flavored version of a Chinese ghost story. Kui Zioan sat next to her, making tea, pouring water and peeling oranges, as if she were serving her mother-in-law, and listened very seriously. Kui Zioan is very introverted. After boarding the ship, she originally wanted to hide it from the girl on the ship, but with such a big person living in the house, her food and daily life could not be hidden. Everyone knew about it the next day. However, the girls on the boat all knew that Kui Zioan was relatively withdrawn and did not like to be with unfamiliar people, so no one bothered her. Xiao Xianger felt that Kui Zioan was a pitiful person in the palace, and she was considered an elder. Naturally, she spent these days with Kui Zioan, getting along with her day and night. Although he is very close to Kui Zioan's tendency to get to the bottom of things really gives Xiao Xianger a headache. The colorful tails, high heels, etc. that Su Buling asked her to make were all placed in the house. Kui Zioan would occasionally see them and ask curiously what they were used for. Xiao Xianger had to find some lame excuses to explain every time, but Kui Zioan was as clear as a mirror and knew that she was lying, which made Xiao Xianger always feel like a guilty thief. After telling the story for a while, Kui Zioan accidentally noticed that Xiao Xiang'er would pick up the small mahogany sign around her waist and rub it a few times. The word was engraved on both sides of the sign. She couldn't help but ask, "Mother, what does the word Zheng mean? I think you take it very seriously." Xiao Xiang'er felt a little hopeless, glanced down and said with a smile, "It's used to record the weather. Well, every time the water rises, a mark will be engraved on it. I used to hang a lot of these in the palace to record rain, snow, etc., but I didn't take them out." Kui Zioan nodded, "It sounds very interesting. My mother is very good at craftsmanship. Please make one for me too." Xiao Xiang'er blinked her apricot eyes, but she didn't refuse. She got up and went back to the house, took out an unused mahogany sign and handed it to Kui Zioan. "It's just a small item. It doesn't need to be made. You can just use it. What are you going to remember? Are the flowers blooming?" Kui Zioan took the mahogany sign and kept it in her arms. "I haven't thought about it yet. Could you please give me some advice? What could Xiao Xiang'er pay attention to?" After holding it in for almost a month, her mind was full of the scene when Su Buling wrote the word on her body. This naturally could not be taught to her daughter-in-law. She shook her head and smiled. "Keep it for now. When you encounter something interesting in the future, just write it down." Interesting things. Kui Zioan thought about it and nodded slightly. In March, the land of Sankan was covered with grass and trees. Dragon flags fluttered on the pass. Soldiers wearing Guanzhong army armor stood solemnly behind the battlements, watching the black dragon-like Ziliang cavalry passing through the pass. The Ziliang army gathered along the way, integrated 50,000 troops in Qinzhou, and officially entered Guanzhong Road after passing Qianyang Pass, the first pass in the northwest. Since the founding of Daiyue, General Su Lai led troops out of the pass to open up wasteland. The Ziliang army rarely crossed this pass again. The last time they passed here was when Su Wangsuyu led more than 10,000 elite cavalry to Qingzhou to destroy relatives for the sake of justice. Although he hadn't been back for a long time, the reputation of General Su Lai had been engraved in the minds of the people of the world. From the northern Qi to the southern Yu, many people said they didn't know who the emperor of Daiyue was, but almost no one said they didn't know who General Su was. Seeing that the Ziliang Iron Cavalry had returned to Guanzhong again and was about to go to war for the country, the people around Chenkang all ran to the banks of the Wei River to watch the excitement. In order to show the people of Guanzhong the majesty of the Ziliang army, small soldiers like Ning Qingyi and Zhongli Chuchu must not go in front. In front were 5,000 Huben cavalry, which had been fully prepared before entering the pass. All the men and horses were wearing full armor, and even the horses had iron masks on their heads. When they walked slowly, the friction of metal and iron and the dull sound of horse hooves hit the lungs directly, which was daunting. Su Buling was alone in front, holding a 10-foot-long horse spear in his hand and wearing a white robe, which was very eye-catching among the 50,000 black armors. Yang Guanyu walked behind him, wearing a tiger head heavy armor, carrying the Suwang flag in his hand, and sitting on a jet-black horse. He looked like a foreign demon god. His terrifying physique alone made the people and the Guanzhong army dumbfounded, more eye-catching than Su Buling. Passing along the Wei River, Yang Guanyu carried the flag without looking away, but whispered, "Little barbarian, is this where you were tricked?" Su Buling was also looking at a river beach by the Wei River. 4 years ago in the winter, he brought more than 100 followers to Chang'an as a hostage. When he walked to the Wei River, he was ambushed by the emperor. All the people he brought were killed, and only he and Lao Xiao escaped. That was also where his dream began. Suddenly walking here again, Su Buling really felt a bit like a lifetime ago, and nodded gently. At that time, I didn't know why I had a high fever and was seriously ill, and I met an assassin and was put under the dragon locking goo. It was Lao Xiao who carried me to kill him. Yang Guanyu lightly spat, raised his hand and pointed at the 50,000 Ziliang iron cavalry behind him. "This time I want to see if that guy dares to send assassins here, and dig up his ancestral graves." Su Buling smiled, and did not respond to this treasonous remark, and rode his horse past the Wei River.